what I'm going to talk to you today is this idea of looking at the web from like a social model perspective, related to education, obviously, because that's the setting in which we're in. But beyond that, just this idea of how the web has changed the way that we interact with one another today, how it's improved and made our lives easier, and how designing for inclusion actually helps us get other people in that haven't really been welcomed to that area of our life already. So obviously talking about web accessibility as the foundation for this, but other concepts as well. So quickly, you know who I am. So if you're interested in Twitter, D Boudreau, so DBOUDREAU is my Twitter handle. Very easy to reach, very reactive also, very interested in being in touch with everyone. So if there's any questions after this, or if you want to have a copy of the presentation or anything like that, contact me and I'll be happy to share that with you, or just start a conversation. And some people like Nick here could tell you that I am on Twitter quite often. So quickly, a few things about me that haven't been mentioned that will be useful in this conversation is I'm working for DQ Systems, which is a company in the United States that pretty much works with in web accessibility. So we're working with different organizations to make their websites accessible, to train their people to create accessible content, to make sure that everything that they do comes with accessibility in mind. So as they're trying to communicate with their client base, as they're trying to avoid being under litigation, whatever the reason really, if they're interested in being more inclusive and being able to reach a broader audience, this is what we do. So it goes from anything from assessing their current website to training them, to giving presentations like this or any other type of information that will help them do that. I'm also involved in the W3C. So anybody knows what the W3C is here, except maybe you, because I know you know. So the W3C basically is the World Wide Web Consortium. It's the group that creates the standards in which we're using for the web. So for instance, if any of you have built a web page before, you're using HTML, you're maybe using CSS. The group that created these languages to begin with is called the W3C. So I'm part of that group. I'm involved in, and one of the standards that they build. So it's pretty much like ISO, but not on an international level as ISO would be. It's a consortium, and consortium is built or made of big players in the computer or IT industry. So Microsoft, Apple, HP, and all the big companies are there pretty much, like 400 members or so. And they build standards, open standards for the web. So one of those standards is the Web Accessibility Guidelines, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is what we'll be talking about, part of what we'll be talking about today, which are standards on accessibility, so making the web accessible, making content accessible. And that's one of the things that I'm involved in. We may talk about some standards in Quebec here if we go down that route tonight. So accessibility standards for the government, which is something that I co-edited with a colleague of mine a few years ago, which again gives the framework for the Quebec government to create content that is accessible to people with disabilities, but also to other groups, and we'll also see that in a few minutes. So, and if you want to have access to the presentation, that's the short URL to get it from SlideShare. It's already over there. And you can download it, or again, you can just contact me and I'll send you a copy of it. So for those who are actually grabbing the URL, it's slidesha.re/1 lowercase o capital UFGQ and then lowercase t. So the first thing I think we need to talk about when we talk sorry. When we talk about accessibility or we talk about inclusion, is actually talking about user experience, so UX in general. So UX can be described in many different ways. The way that I like to describe it most is this idea that you want to create a deep understanding of what your users are, what they need, what they value, what their abilities are, and what their limitations are as well. So once you've grabbed or understood what that is, it makes it much easier for you to be able to service them with content that will meet those needs, basically. And it's based on 8 different principles, The first one being that your content you need your content to be as useful as possible. So that's pretty self-explanatory. You want that content to be credible. So if you're sending information over the web on Ebola, for instance, where that content comes from or whom it comes from is really important. If my aunt is telling something about Ebola, it doesn't have the same weight as if the College of Doctors does that. So, Collège des Médecins, College of Doctors, maybe, not sure. But anyway, people that are credible when it comes to Ebola would be the ones you want to look for. And then content that is desirable, so find ways to make sure that people actually want that, or that you present it in a way that is desirable for people to actually want to use it, will contribute as well to this idea of providing something that works or is positive for them. Content that is findable, so easily found through web search, for instance, is another component of this. Usable, so this idea of providing content that is easy to use for people. And then accessible is the other piece of this. And once you combine all these things, even though accessibility as such is often seen as a nice to have because people find it complicated, it's still part of what we consider to be a positive user experience. And when you have all these components together, this is what creates value. And then once you have that value, you can talk about having something that provides a good user experience, basically. There's more information about this if you want to see it afterwards on these diagrams. And then, so when we talk about, and I mentioned that this idea of accessibility was considered to be complicated by a lot of people, and rightfully so, because there's a lot of things to look into, and we'll see that in a few minutes. But the idea basically is we want to be we want to be aware of what these issues are and what the gaps can be for someone who has a disability accessing that content, especially in a setting like McGill. If I'm going to physically come into a class and have all my information provided in PDF documents, for instance, which is probably something that happens quite often, and those PDFs are actually just scanned images put together into a document, and I can't actually see that document, but I could read it with my software. If it's only images, I'm not going to read anything. The content, the text itself, is logged down into an image. I can't read it anymore. Unless if I have other technologies that will allow me to turn that into, like optical character recognition, that will allow me to turn that into text, but then that is usually doesn't work very well. So if I'm provided with content that comes in a format that is difficult to access it from the very beginning, and I have that every single time that I'm trying to use the content that is provided by my teachers, I could get discouraged really quickly and eventually start thinking about abandoning this crazy idea that I have to get a diploma, which shouldn't be a crazy idea, right? It should be something that everybody should be entitled to. But whenever we provide content, or we use technology, or we use settings or platforms where getting to that content is complicated, or we create barriers willingly or unwillingly, and most of the time unwillingly, create barriers for people, then we're creating a setting of exclusion for different people of various abilities or disabilities, and we. So far I've been talking about people who don't see, so people that are blind. I've been talking about people that weren't able to use a mouse, or that would have a motor disability, can't use your hands, for instance. But we could talk about other things. We could talk about learning disabilities. We could talk about dyslexia. We could talk about ADHD. We could talk about ADD. There are dozens of other things that would fall under this umbrella as well, and we'll cover some of those a little later on as well. So, if people are looking into UX, because UX is a big thing. If you're involved in the web even a little bit, you've heard about UX multiple times. 10 years ago, people were laughing the idea of UX because it was just nice to have. What we needed was engineers engineering solutions for people who would use them. With time, we've realized that engineered solution or design that was engineered wasn't really very usable. So maybe all the features are there, but you can't figure out how the interface works. That's because it's been engineered and not designed. So this idea of designing things using UX principles makes all the difference in the world between two applications that do the same thing, but one of them you really like and the other one you just can't figure out. And it's just not a question of colors and choosing the right images. It's actually thinking about the navigation mechanisms that are available and the way that content is organized, all the information is structured. All these things matter and make a difference in how you want to use it. So if we have this to begin with, but we never thought about the accessibility part, because that's usually what people do, then you provide a really, really good service or product for people, but only for a portion of them. So you might think that people with disabilities are like a very small fraction of the user base. My intent is to show you that it's actually pretty much a majority, and we'll see why. So why do people think that accessibility is so hard? Pretty good question, so I figured I might as well ask people. So I did ask a bunch of people. I don't know how many. It could be 15, it could be 2,000. I don't know. I asked it on Twitter, so who knows how many people I asked it for too. But I did get some really interesting responses from this. And the question was, if you struggle with implementing web accessibility in your projects, why do you think that is? What are your challenges? Pretty straightforward question. So some of the answers that I received was, so the first one was from a client of mine actually, who said WCAG, so that's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, so that's the standard we're working with to create accessible content, is not a requirements document, therefore it's not something that you have to do, it's like a nice to have again. So business analysts and developers don't understand how and where it is relevant to them, they don't know what to do. So if you have a developer, and obviously people are well-intentioned, and at least I like to think that way. So people want to do the right thing, but they're also very busy. So if they don't understand what you're doing or what you're asking of them, chances are your requirement is going to be dropped at some point because there are really other things that they need to be doing that they actually understand. So if people don't understand what they need to do, then obviously this becomes complicated and they're not going to be doing it. Another answer that I got was, a lot of it is just excuses. Well, we don't have the time, we don't have the money, the resources, or to implement accessibility into our projects, so we're not doing it. Then you could ask yourself whether or not the reasons why this is not possible is because that the techniques or the best practices that they're using are not really best practices to begin with. If you're creating content, say you're creating a bus schedule, so you have a table of data, you have all the information into it. If you don't know that and visually you present it in a way that the first row is actually a row of headers, so visually they're different. They're probably the background color is probably different. They're probably in bold instead of being in regular type. And you visually can see that the way that it is organized, it's the hour at which the bus passes, the corner of the street, and all that information. So when you look at the data in the table, you can relate to what that actually means. If you're a developer, you might want to make that table really pretty and nice looking, but underneath in the code that you're using, you're also passing on semantics. You're passing information, and that information is what is being used by technology to convey that information back to the users. So a screen reader, for instance, would be able to tell you, well, this is a table. Table has five columns and 25 rows, and the first column are headers, the first row are headers, and the headers are date, corner of the street, and so on. So you're starting to understand what the table is about, even though you can't actually see it. So it makes a difference. So if they don't know what they're doing, or if they're not aware of accessibility, then they will create this thing visually for you, and it will be looking great. But functionally speaking, it's going to be lacking in many different ways. Another answer that I got is too much documentation to look through, not enough real-world examples on popular websites, too many screen readers, and browser inconsistencies. Again, if you're working with the web and you've been building content for the web, you know that Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari, Chrome, Opera, and all the other browsers all behave differently. So finding the right spot in between all those browsers to get something that works well on each of them is always a challenge, has always been a challenge, and will probably always be a challenge. So again, if you have all these things to consider, and I'm asking you for requirements that you don't really get, chances are you're not going to focus on those that much because you have all these other things to do. Because they think it ruins their fun to be creative. Whenever you talk to a designer, for instance, and you tell them, well, accessibility is also about people that have low vision or people that are colorblind, for instance. And if you're using some color combinations, these color contrasts won't be easy to notice, therefore you shouldn't be using them. And if you're a designer, chances are you really like to use really small gray font on a white background because that's really elegant. But for a lot of people, that's also very hard to read. And for all of you, if you're using a smartphone when you're outside under the sun, it's impossible to read. But it's nice, it looks nice, and the designer's job is to make something that looks nice. So they like to do that. So if you're talking about constraints in terms of design, then obviously you're hindering their ability to be creative, so they don't like that. And that's understandable. In many cases, people have never seen assistive technology in use, so screen readers, braille displays, anything of that nature. And if you don't understand the why and the what, then the unknown always seems hard, obviously. And then, not sure people think it's art. I think many of them just don't know about it, or worse, they do know and they simply don't care. That's unfortunately true as well. The one answer that I liked most, which would have been our most popular answer for that quiz, would have been this one, where Aiden pretty much said they just don't, in my opinion. They can be bothered with it. So that part is pretty negative, but the second part is really the part that interested me most. The key is to make it part of their regular process. So going back to this idea of creating content for students in McGill, for any of the courses that are provided, if you're asking teachers or their assistants to create content and make it accessible, you're asking them for extra work, and they don't even know where to start. If you're providing them with the tools that do this in the first place, so we were talking earlier before this session, this lecture, we're talking about the tools that are being used, like the LMS, the learning management system that is being used, and we mentioned Desire to Learn, which is actually a pretty good one. So if you're using that one, you're starting off on a better foot than if you're using something that doesn't take accessibility into consideration at all. So it's already a good start, and then you can start from there or build from there and try to get to another level completely. So we've been talking about all these things, and what I haven't done clearly is give you a definition of what we're talking about when we talk about accessibility. And I figure that might be something that may help you frame this whole discussion. Actually, so let's put it this way. So the inclusive practice of removing barriers that prevent access to people with, and I would add, or without disabilities. So that's Wikipedia's definition, basically. Pretty broad, obviously, but the idea is you build your web content in a way that meets the expectations of user groups that are usually on the extremes of your spectrum. So when you design anything, you usually tend to think about your target audience. So those are, I don't know, maybe students that are in their early 20s, maybe 55% female, 45% male, most likely English speaking if they're coming at McGill, maybe not, I don't know. Just throwing things out there. But you have a pretty good idea of what your typical student would be. But if you started counting or seeing all the different students in the 39,000 students that are attending McGill, you would realize that a lot of them are not that stereotyped. They're actually very different from that. And so this idea of accessibility is thinking about all the things that could be creating barriers for these other people and making sure that they're included as well, that their needs are also met. So that's one way to look at it. Might not be completely clear as to what that means for what we're doing here or what we intend to be doing or providing for these people. So another definition would be allowing them to accomplish themselves to the full extent of their capacity or goals so they can be able to do a few things, which we take for granted. Some of them being able to perceive the content that is available on the screen, being able to understand what that content is, being able to navigate through it, being able to interact with whatever, whether it's filling in a form or chatting with someone or anything of that nature, interacting with people or interacting with your software or your content, and then contributing to it as well. So according to the United Nations, we have about 10% of the world's population that lives with some form of disability. That's where we start from. 650 million people, that's basically our user base when we talk about accessibility, or when we talk about accessibility for people with disabilities. So that's 1 person out of 10. So we're roughly, what, about 30, I guess, here? So that means that 3 of us get to be elected to stop using the web right now, or pretty much have trouble using the web. So who wants to be that person, right? Nobody wants to do that. So think about all the things that we've talked about, all the things that are making your life easier and everything. If all of a sudden we take that away from you, because we need to meet that statistic. So we probably have in the room people that do have some form of disabilities, visible or not. So we probably already are meeting that ratio. So I'm colorblind. Nick is using it. Well, we have 2 gentlemen with wheelchairs, so we already have 3. With the 3 of us, we're already in that group together. Some of you may have learning disabilities. Some of you may have other things. And the thing is with disabilities is that the vast majority of them are not visible. And people don't walk around just saying, I have a disability. So people don't tend to share that much. And they actually tend to hide it a lot, especially in the workplace. but it's there. If you're working with people that work with computers and you have some of them that really insist on keeping their smaller screen for some reason and they have this huge resolution in it, it's not only because they're used to it, because they actually need it most of the time. But they won't tell you, and why would they? And so there are a lot of different things like that that we need to take into consideration when we think about who we're actually trying to help with web accessibility. It's much broader than you think. And then we have the World Health Organization that says that it's not like 10%, it's actually over 1 billion people. So that's more like 15% of the population that would have some difficulty using the web for a certain number of reasons. So that's actually 1 out of every 7 of us, which is an even bigger number. And like I said, a lot of these things we don't see to begin with, so we can't really know how many people there are. And 1 billion people is actually how much people we had in China in 1985. So just to give you a perspective, that's a lot of people. So what that means is that people with disabilities are by far the world's largest minority on the web. So when we talk about the web accessibility, we talk about, yeah, the blind guy or this other one that's deaf, so we have to create videos with captions because of him. But all these people combined together are our largest minority and by far. So it's a lot of people. And if you're building content again, whether in the context of a class or you're just building content because you're playing around with the technologies, you know that you need to make sure that it works well with a certain number of browsers and everything. And you'll be looking at statistics to see which ones are relevant to you. And if you have people that are, I don't know, maybe using, like if you have 10% of your user base that uses a mobile device to access your content, you will want to go out of your way to make it usable for them as well. Because it's a big 10%. We're talking about something like 15 in here, in this case here. So it should be something that's relevant to you. And if it actually were only 15, that would still be a big thing. But as I'll show you, it's much bigger than that. So largest minority on the web is what I want you to keep in mind for the moment. Examples of this, still in statistics. So when we talk about hearing impairments, so in the World Health Organization, around the world, 360 million people have a form of disability when it comes to hearing. For every for 10 people that are hard of hearing, we have one that's actually deaf, and about 32% of people over 65 years of age have some sort of hearing disability. When we talk about visual impairment, it's 285 million people, 39 million of which are blind, 246 million of which have moderate to severe visual limitations as well. So those are pretty big groups. And again, we see that when it comes to people that are older, 50 years and older in this case, that's about 65% of the people who actually have a disability that are in that group. And we know that. I mean, I wasn't wearing glasses 5 years ago. What about you? I mean, some of us have had glasses for a long time, and some of us are still resisting actually buying some, or we like using lenses because we don't actually want to wear glasses. So we know that we're growing into these things over time. So if we go back to this idea of 285 million people, if we look at how many people we have in the United States, we currently have 316 million people, but in 2001 we had 285 million. So we have as many people that have a visual disability around the world as there were people in the United States, 13 years ago. Again, it's a lot of people. It's a lot more people than we would think. In Canada, basically, 3.8 million of Canadians have a disability, or actually being reported as having a disability, according to the census they run every 5 years or so or something. 4.4% of the population between ages 15 and 24 have a disability, and then it ranges up to 22.5 for those who are 75 years and older. So obviously, the more the older you get, the more likely you are to have a disability. So 35.2 million people. In 2002, 12 is how many people we were in Canada. That's 13.7% of the population that has a disability. And we're estimating that with people getting older, basically, that by, actually, wrong slide, sorry. No, that's not what I meant. The other thing is money. So when we talk about the spending power of these people with disabilities, just in Canada alone, it's $25 billion a year of annual income that they can use, they can contribute to these things. So what I often hear, and I'm assuming it could be said in this setting as well, is that why would we bother with making our website accessible for people that are by definition marginalized, don't have a job, don't have money. Why would I waste my time with that? Why would I make my website about selling running shoes for somebody who's blind? They're not running, right? So why would I bother? But obviously these people have money. Obviously these people have people that they live with. They may actually buy something for somebody else. Or you may be creating an experience that's very negative for them, and they'll talk about that to their people around them, and all these people are going to start going to your competitor because their site is actually accessible and you're not. So there's other incentives to think about besides just this idea that people with disabilities mean people that don't have a lot of money. But then it's not only about people with disabilities as such. It's a lot of other things. So can you think of a few examples of where you might be situationally disabled? So I talked about falling while you're skiing, which would be a pretty bad one. But there are other things. Can you think of one maybe that you could think of? Situation where you would be in a situation where it would be difficult to use the web or use technology in general. So examples of this would be if you broke your mouse. That's an easy one. Mouse doesn't work anymore. Batteries are dead. You don't have any more batteries. Your dog ate your USB port. It's not working anymore. That happens all the time. You broke your wrist. That's another one. You're using mobile devices. How many of you have a smartphone? Android, iPhone, anything like that? How comfortable is that experience compared to using your desktop computer at home?
1 out of 10.
Yeah. So how many of you will wait until you're back home to do some of those transactions because it's not as comfortable or it's a little awkward using it on your phone? It's small, it's whatever. It's a little hard to read. That's the same thing. That's exactly how somebody who has low vision feels in front of a 27-inch screen. It's the exact same thing. So sun glare on your screen. You're outside, you're trying to read something, and you just can't make it, so you're doing like this, trying to hide the sun. Same thing. You have a low vision disability when you're doing that. Feeling tired or unwell, you're not feeling good, you're trying to concentrate on something, you just can't figure it out. You shut down your laptop and you'll read it tomorrow morning, you'll feel much better. If you do that, it's another situation that will very much look like somebody who has a cognitive disability and can't concentrate much. You're in a noisy environment. You're trying to work from a cafe because you decided you wouldn't work from home or from the office this afternoon, but you have to watch that video and it's not captioned. And you can't hear anything. You don't have your headphones. You're just watching this and you're hoping that you can read lips, figure out what they're saying, but you can't really do that. So you're in the same setting as someone who has a hearing disability in that case. You have kids playing around. They're running around, they're having a lot of fun, so you feel like you're a good parent because they're actually having fun and they're actually not in front of a screen, they're playing, but you can't concentrate because they're there. So again, another situation that's very much like being disabled. You had a long, stressful day, and the list goes on and on and on. So there are many situations in which you feel, you find yourself in a situation that's very close to the situation of somebody who has a disability.
The one that I would like to mention is being faced with a website that's written in a language you're not familiar with.
That's true, yeah. So language barrier is another one, obviously. So especially if you're trying to figure out information that is really important to you, and the language or the jargon being used makes it more complicated, and it's actually something that's it's a very important either transaction or action that you want to make. You don't want to mess it up. So if you're not sure about it, you might just say, I'll wait until somebody else is there to help me. Which is exactly, again, the same thing as somebody who has a cognitive disability might feel, or any type of disability really. If they can't really feel like they're controlling what's going on, they might not want to do it. So if it's going to affect us too, I guess it's kind of a big deal, right? So it's not just these people, it's actually all of us. That's the idea here. So we're all in a situation where we might do that, and as we use the web in different devices more and more, whether it's mobile devices or whether it's in your car, whether it's on your fridge, whether it's on your TV or anything, when you're using the web, you might be in that situation pretty often. And we're getting away from the paradigm of using a mouse. We're having touch screens now. Some people have difficulty just touching the screen and getting to react because there's something in their chemistry that doesn't work as other people do. My girlfriend, for instance, my partner, should I say, as that. So she'll be tapping on that button 500 times, nothing happens. I just go by and I do this, and then it works. It's frustrating. So she has to use a stylus. I don't know why, but in her chemistry, something doesn't work quite as it should, I guess, but it's not working for her. But so everybody, and she doesn't have a disability. She certainly doesn't consider herself to have a disability because she can't press that button on Facebook. Why would she? So, and then we can go into other things like literacy. There was a study a few years ago, maybe almost 10 years ago, that basically said that about 50% of the population has low literacy or trouble reading to some degree. That's a lot of people again. We're 7.8 million in Quebec, so about, 3.89% of them are affected by this, which means that whenever we have content online that is a little complicated to read, they might be shut out. So obviously we're in a higher education setting, so we're expecting people to have a certain mastery of the language as they're doing this. But still, if you're dyslexic, if you have any type of disability concentrating, if it's overly complicated for nothing, for no reason, you're again shutting the door. So while you're probably doing this because you want to push your students to learn as much as possible and use the right term and the right terminology and everything, you may be shutting some people out because you're asking just too much for the wrong reasons. It's not just a question of pleasing your own ego and making you feel like you're really, really smart because you're using that term that has 25 letters instead of using 5 words that would say the same thing. But for a lot of people, using those 5 words would make all the difference in succeeding or not, because ultimately it's not going to matter whether they know that stuff or not. What's going to matter is whether or not they can eventually do that job or get that diploma. That's really what matters. So in terms of statistics for this, we have 42% of adults between the age of 16 and 65 who have low literacy skills in Canada. 55% of the working age adults don't have adequate health literacy skills, which means that if they get a prescription, they don't really know what to do with it. So that's a big problem, and that's a lot of people also. It's more than half of the population that wouldn't be able to read the posology on a bottle of pills and see whether or not they can do that. So when you take that into perspective, there are a lot of things that they can't do. And we're assuming that everybody can do these things because we can do them, so why wouldn't they be able to do that? And then 16% of Quebecers aged between 16 and 65 are on the lowest rung of their reading ability skills, which means that they can basically sign their name and not much else. 16%. So, and we're not talking about people that are older that would not have been going to school and like went to school for 2 or 3 years and then started helping around the house in like 50, 60 years ago. We're talking about people that are between 16 and 65 today. That's a lot of people. So people that are just dropped out of the system and will never be able to get back on it. So that's people with disabilities to me, really. It's much more than what we see on a regular basis. And then there's this. All of us, basically. Like I said, I wasn't wearing glasses 5 years ago. My hearing was much better before I started listening to a lot of music. It's getting worse and worse, and it probably will continue to do that. And I'm probably not the only one in this room, right? So most people's first experience with assistive technology is this. So they don't really know what a screen reader is. They don't really know what sip and puff device is, and why would they? But they really know what glasses are. And that's your interface between you and your computer. If you don't have that, you can't read anymore. If you don't have that, you can't read a newspaper anymore. So it puts it into a different perspective. So we're pretty far from all these technologies that do this stuff. It's actually something that's very, very close to us, whether we realize it or not. So again, in Canada, according to Employment and Social Development Canada, when it comes to older people, we have 5 million of the population, so 14.4, that are over 65 in 2011. So that's the other one I was looking for earlier. So this one, this number is expected to reach 10.4 million, so pretty much double by 2036. So people are getting older. They're growing into situations where it will be a little more difficult to do some of those things. So that's, again, 14.4% of the population in this case. So we had 13.7 before for people with disabilities. This is a completely separate track of 14.4%. So we're at 27-something percent of the population that benefits from accessibility. That's what we're talking about here. So when we're talking about this minority, it's actually a pretty big number. 25%, 27% of the population. It's more like 1 in every 4 person is affected by this. So, and when it comes to the aging with disability, basically you see that the older you get, so 15 to 24, 25 to 44, 45 to 64, and so on, the more likely you are to have a disability. So interestingly enough, males are less likely to have a disability than women the older they get. So you could assume that they're either lying or there's something really great about us. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that this number should be higher than it is because most older men would probably never admit to having a disability. Even though they can't even see you, they'll pretend like they're okay. Women are probably more likely to admit that, which I think is why we have more a higher prevalency number for women. But basically, when you're 75 and actually, let's just take that one, 65 here. We're pretty much like 35%, 34% maybe of the population that has a disability when you reach that age. Again, a lot of people. So the question is, which one will you be majoring in? So as you get older, I'm pretty sure that it'll be vision and hearing for me. Hopefully, maybe not dementia, but that could be possible as well. But I mean, we're probably all going to be majoring in one of these things. So let's look at it from this perspective. So get out of the shoes that you were in when at the beginning when I asked you this. Go back into your own shoes, and now think about the things that you like, and now it's getting a little more clear about what's waiting for you in a couple of years from now. 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, who knows? Tomorrow morning, if you have a stroke, maybe. It could happen to all of us, really. So I don't mean to be alarmist or dramatic with this, but I just want to make you understand that it's really not us versus them. It's all of us together. We're all pretty much in this together. So can we still talk about a minority when we have this combined together? I think not, personally. So a friend of mine nailed this down at some point, and I think it's dead on. Web accessibility is not about disabilities, it's about people. So again, going back to the setting here, who are we providing classes or courses to? Are we doing this just to please the ego of the university, or are we doing this for the students? If we're doing this for the students, which I'm hoping is the case, then why aren't we providing them with what they need to begin with? Why aren't we providing them with material that's adapted to their need? Or why aren't we providing them with material that could be adapted to their needs if they actually ask you for that? So McGill is lucky because they have OSD. I'm not sure that we have something like that in every university, especially if you get out of the bigger cities, for instance, and you go into smaller areas. Chances are that people are not being helped as much as they can be helped at McGill. And that's really sad because people can have all the potential, they just happen not to see or hear well. So they can't really sit in that class because they can't hear what the teacher is saying, but they could do really well if they had somebody assisting them. They wouldn't have any problem. So instead of thinking about the disability as something that the person has and that's their problem, why not think about disability as the situation in which that person is being placed that creates that disability for them. So if I'm in a class and I'm watching a video that is not captioned, I'm in the back of the class, or even if I'm not on the first row and I have trouble hearing, it's not really my fault if I can't hear. It's really the video's fault or the teacher's fault because it's actually not captioned. That's what should be done in the first place to make sure that everybody enjoys that experience as much as possible. And I mean, again, bringing this back to me, whenever I'm watching like TV series or a movie or anything at night with my partner who doesn't speak English that well, and we usually listen to original soundtracks, so we'll watch the movie in English if that's how it was made, or when our kids are sleeping, the volume is way down, so it's difficult to hear, but if we have the subtitles in, there's no problem. So we can watch everything we want, and we're not disabled, but in that situation, we're in a setting where it makes it much easier for us if we are supported by this technology. So another thing, universal design for learning, basically, so I'm assuming that, I know some of you are familiar with this. I'm assuming that everybody has an idea of what that is, but the concept basically goes down to three things. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is, again, apparently, I haven't found the research myself, but I've heard that there's a research, that's the beginning, that's the start, that says that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints, basically. So I've seen that a lot as I was researching for this. And so maybe that's exaggerated, but what it means basically is that people learn in different ways. So if you think about teaching, or if you think about learning, the experience of learning as this one thing, chances are a lot of people will be left out again. So if the whole thing is about lecturing only, and you don't encourage more engagement or more interaction, so people might just drop because they can't keep up with it. So thinking about ways to create or to design your learning experiences so it reaches and meets more different expectations or different needs. So 3 basic principles for this. One that says that when you present something, you present it in different ways, so people have a better chance of understanding what you're actually saying. Allowing them to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways. So you explain something to them, but then you try to get some feedback or some interaction with them, so they can voice or explain or express what they think they've understood, so you can adjust things as you go along, just to make sure that everybody leaves the room with the same understanding of that concept that you showed. And then engagement, making it fun, making it interesting. Instead of just doing what I'm currently doing with you guys, because I know I'm under pressure over time, to just push all that information onto you, but have that conversation. Make sure that it's not just about one person telling or sharing his knowledge with the class, but creating interactions. So when I do workshops, for instance, what I tend to do a lot is, because nobody goes to these things without knowing at least something. So the idea would be to, you guys have experienced using mobile phones before, so you know things that are uncomfortable with it. It would make much more sense in a context like this one to say, well, let's discuss in smaller groups the difficulties that you have using your phone when you're outside, when you're walking to get somewhere, where you have one eye on your phone, one eye on the road, because it would be bad for you to bump into someone, or worse, walk into something you didn't want to walk in. And so your half of your concentration is on your phone. You're using one thumb. You may have a coffee in the other. It's pretty awkward. You have people, so you have to like slalom around people. It's not the best situation to be concentrated on something. So you might make mistakes because of that. Again, going back to this idea of being disabled in a situation. So it's much more interesting to present content in a way that is engaging, where people will actually contribute or collaborate into building that understanding and that knowledge, rather than just push it to people, which is the traditional way of doing these things. So thinking about these principles when you create the content, again, will make it much more accessible, not from a standards perspective like we would think about in W3C terms, but in the sense of actually making it easier to understand for everyone, because it's approached in different ways. So those standards, I'm going to go very quickly over these slides. This is the standard we're talking about when we talk about WCAG. You have a bunch of different rules in there that tell you basically what to do with your content to make it accessible. We're not going to go over those details just yet. There's a bunch of documents that exist to help you support that. So if you're a developer, for instance, and you want to understand what that actually means, you get all that stuff that you can look into. And when you look at these things, and that's a mind map basically of what those standards are. So you have 4 different principles. Each of these principles are broken down into guidelines. Those guidelines have different success criteria assigned to them, and that's basically what accessibility is about. And I'm not going to go there. If you want to go there, again, I can share that document with you. What's really important in this case is this. So when you look at all that information, this is what technical documentation for accessibility is. So who do you think would read this? That's a lot of content. That's a lot of things to read, especially if you're already busy. And let's go back to this idea of asking teachers to provide accessible content. Are we really going to ask them to read over 1,000 pages of technical documentation so they can produce that one PDF? Of course not. So it needs to be something else. It needs to be about the technology that's being used. It needs to be about maybe having a group like OSD that comes in and helps at some level. Probably, I'm sure your resources are limited anyway, so you wouldn't be able to do that for everyone. But this idea of having a mechanism through which this information can be made accessible, or changing some of the technologies that we're using so it doesn't create as many barriers for people. Using just pure HTML works really, really well for most people. But when you start using different formats, then it becomes much more complicated for them. And basically, if we had to keep 4 things in mind, it would be those principles that we have under the standard. So perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So pour. So if you're wondering about the glass of wine, it's not because I was just feeling a little too happy on Saturday night. It's because it's actually P-O-U-R. So that's one way for you to remember what that is. So perceivable, obviously, is pretty self-explanatory. Same as operable. So operable, usable, Being able to use it in different contexts than just your mouse, for instance, would be operable. Understandable, just understanding what this is, either in terms of the content being used or the way it is presented to you. So your expectations, how predictable something is, all that stuff falls under understandable. And robust is probably the one that's most complicated, but it really sums down to a very simple concept, which is when you take that information that you've provided me and I use it in my own setting, which is very different from yours, will it still work? So if I'm using your PDF document or your Flash application on my iPhone, will it work? No. So it's not robust at all. If I'm using your PDF in my screen reader and your PDF happens to be just a collection of images bundled together into a document, all I will hear is image undefined, page 2, image undefined, for 50 pages. I'm not going to hear anything from it. So not robust. So that's the idea. So basically that things work in different settings as well as intended. There's this document that you may know about, Distance Education Accessibility Guidelines in California from the California College, can't remember their name. Anyway, pretty important and influential group in California for colleges, state colleges or something. And they came up with these guidelines for accessibility, which are exactly what higher ed needs in general. So they talk about what you do with text, with images, with audio, with video, and complex, which is basically when you put these things together, and it creates that other thing. So what happens when you have some video and some content that are synchronized on a page? So as you're reading stuff, something is highlighted and your video pops in and stuff at some point, there's an image showing up. So all these things that you can synchronize fall under complex, but these give you pretty straightforward guidelines as to how to handle these types of content. So much easier than going back to this, much easier. Because it's like 40 pages. I mean, it's really, compared, it's really reasonable. And of course, there's this idea of user research, which might sound completely ludicrous to a lot of people, but if you actually ask your users what they want, they may provide you with feedback. That's been known to happen before. So asking them what they want or what they need or what their problems are, what their challenges are, and take that into consideration as you're building content might help. Just saying. So being empathetic, again, when you're designing this, when you're thinking about these technologies, when you're thinking about the strategies that you're going to be using, in order to make sure that people can actually use your stuff, is what this is about. So we talked about people with disabilities. We talked about people that are aging. We understand there's a lot of people. We understand that it's also us. And then there's mobile that comes in and blows everything out of the water. So again, how has mobile changed the way that people use the web, that you use the web? Obviously, it's changed it in many, many ways. A lot of people are using tablets now and don't use their desktop computers anymore or as much, because most of the things that they do, they can do just about anywhere. If they're not really creating stuff and they're only like reading newspapers online or going to Facebook or stuff like that, applications are great. They don't need more than that. So it's really shifting the way that people are using the web. And even stuff that for people that are really active using different types of devices, they find that there are certain comfort zones with each of those devices. So mobile web changes a lot of things. So I don't know if that's true or how much it is true, but according to Vitamin Talent, by 2014, mobile internet usage around the world will overtake desktop browsing. That's actually already happened, just so you know. But the cool thing is, they're saying that it will increase by 66% each year. As of now, 2014, at least to 2017 or 2018, which means that in the next 4 or 5 years or so, we're going to see a huge increase in mobile usage to the detriment of desktop computing. So you might not replace your computer next time. You might just buy a really, really, really good tablet or tablet if you're using a phone instead. With the iPhone 6 Plus, for instance, which is like in between the iPhone and the iPad, maybe that's all you need. I don't know. But it will change the way that we use the web for sure. And the fact is, mobile is not the technology of the future of the web. It's actually the technology of today. So when you talk about people about this, they'll tell you, oh yeah, we need to consider the web at some point because this is where people will be in the future. They're there now. They're already there now. And I'm not going to get away in front of myself, but they're there now. That's today's technology, basically. So some examples of the technology that you can use in your phone that helps with disabilities, or that was invented for people with disabilities in the first place, and then integrated into those phones that you may be using on a regular basis, at least some of them on a regular basis. So screen reader, maybe not. Zooming all the time. I'm sure you are. A lot of those websites are so small, you need to just zoom in to be able to read stuff. Auto-completion when you're writing emails, very convenient if you happen to have the right language setting when you write, of course, because otherwise that makes it very awkward. Autocorrection on words, keyboard shortcuts, dictation on your phone, speak screen, same thing. If you have an iPhone again, you can just set it up so when you swipe 2 fingers down, it will start reading whatever is on the screen. So you don't even need to go to VoiceOver. You can just do that and listen to it. Very convenient. Font adjustment, if you don't like the font size, you can bump it up if it's too small for you, or bring it down if it's too big for your liking. Invert colors in grayscale, closed captions, visible and vibrating alerts, all these things can help you be more productive, be more comfortable when you're using that device, which is very disabling to begin with. It's so small. It's getting bigger, but it's not going to get that much bigger than it is now. If the iPhone 6 is about, it's like something like 20% bigger than this one here. That's pretty big for my pocket, probably for yours as well. Pretty big for my hand at some point to hold it. We don't want to go back to the cell phones of the 1990s where it was this big and weighing 20 pounds, right? So there's a limit to how much bigger it's going to get. But all these things help in making it more comfortable anyway. So if we're agreeing on the idea that accessibility is about understanding the barriers that people face, when we when we start realizing how much these assistive technologies are becoming mainstream, the only thing that it can do really is building more empathy towards people with disabilities. So we understand how useful these things are for us. They're obviously that much more useful for people who actually need them in the first place, or who actually needed them in the first place when they were created. So just a few ideas again about some statistics. That comes from a presentation from a friend of mine, who from a client. I think it was 2012. But basically, he said the percentage of users visiting from a mobile device or tablet was just 0.1% in 2008. It has since increased exponentially, 200 to 400% per year, to be 6.2% today. So the 6.2% is not that big of a deal right now, but the exponentially increasing by for so many years should ring a bell. In 10 years, what will it be? Will we even be bothering with a laptop, cumbersome thing that weighs 7 pounds and requires you to have a big bag? Why would we do that? And then the other one was, I was talking about different resolutions earlier in this presentation. So in 2008, they detected 71 different screen resolutions among their visitors. By 2012, it was 830. So I started building websites in 1997. We basically had 2. 830. What will it be in 10 years? It's just out of control and will never change. That will always be something that the user has all the control. So, and it's not going to, once we've reached that point, it's not going to go back. So bringing this back to the idea of different people coming in class using different technologies to access the content, the way that they access it or the tools that they use to access it will make a big difference in how usable that content happens to be for them. So this is just a graph of global internet device sales, and basically you see that from 2000 to 2014, actually 2016, but projection, we're thinking that personal computers are going to keep moving up, but not by so much. Smartphones, as of 2009, huge peak. Tablets, by a little later, same thing, huge peak. So they were here in 2012. We're about here right now. So we're seeing that what people are buying and therefore using, because if you have an old computer and you have a tablet that you just bought, which one are you going to be using? Most of the time you're going to be using your tablet because that works better. So you'll be using these things much more than you're using this from this point on. And earlier I had a slide where it said that mobile would overtake desktop in 2014. That actually happened in January of this year, where we had mobile going over the barrier of like 1.6 billion people, actually almost 2 billion people, and then desktop keeps going up again, but not as fast. So we're at that point. We've reached that point. And in January of 2014, 55% of internet usage across the world was on mobile devices and not on desktop. So that keeps increasing again. So you may see a trend. Not sure, but you may see a trend. When it comes to media consumption, the same thing. So we have TV, online, radio, mobile, print, and other. The ones that are really interesting are online, which was pretty stable at 25-26% up until 2013 when it dropped to 20%. Radio obviously goes down. Mobile goes way up. So mobile started at 4% in 2009, came up to 12 by 2012, and jumped to 20% by 2013. So right now, where we are, we're probably like around 25, maybe 30, if we had up-to-date data on this. So assuming it's only 25, that means that 1 out of every 4 students that comes to class would be using a mobile device and not using a laptop. So if you're building your content for laptops, or if you're thinking laptop when you're building it at home, you're not helping 1 out of 4 of your students. And that's the bandwidth, basically, on mobile per year. So very little by 2010. By 2015, like 6, so that's in terabytes, right? So 6.2 million terabytes of information, of transactions through mobile devices rather than desktop. So again, it's just huge. So what does that mean for students and the devices they use today, basically? They use all these things, and they'll keep using those things much more. So what does that mean for them? How complicated does that make life for them if you're only thinking about this and that when you're creating that content? Chances are, for most learning objects, the mark is being missed. So again, like I was saying, 1 out of 4 basically at this point probably not able to use some of the content or has struggles with using that content. Makes it more complicated. Maybe some things need to be changed, or the focus needs to change a little bit. So what separates good and great design is the attention to detail, something that Jeffrey Zeldman said a while ago. You could scratch design and write content, it would be the same thing. So designing great content designing good content for class is great, is a good thing. Designing great content would maybe mean paying attention to those details, make sure that it's more accessible, make sure that it's more inclusive, and that it's more useful for more people, basically. So I wanted to do this, but we have like 9 minutes left, so we're not going to do it now. But if you want to do it, and I invite you to do that, you could go to either McGill.ca, Flickr.com, or CNN.com, and you could try to browse that with your device and see what happens. So I'm not bashing on McGill. It just happens that, interestingly enough, I was looking for websites that had that specific problem, and by accident I went to McGill and it had that problem. So I was like, wow. But basically, and the problem is, if you go to that website, the font is pretty small, and it's locked to that size. You can't change that, which is kind of ironic, right? So, and it's only one parameter that they have in that website that says log that, when you get to that level, log the font size to this, basically. That's what it is. So it's one line of code that the developer added in because he thought that was the right thing to do. Probably thinking that it was the right thing to do. Why would he do it otherwise? Or maybe he just copied that from another project and started with that and didn't even know about it. But it's there. And if I want to read that thing, maybe I can't because it's too small for me. So all three sites have the same issue. To be fair, at McGill, only the first page has that. When you get into the content, then everything can be zoomed in. So that's pretty cool. But that is if you can get through the front door. The other ones are completely locked down. You can't change anything, you can't control anything. So your only option would be to say, well, can I maybe use my phone, buy an Apple TV, and then connect my Apple TV with my phone through AirPort, for instance, and then use my TV to show my iPhone so I could read that stuff. That would work. But who does that, right? And then there's this guy, Dan Formosa. At one time he said, what we need to do is what we need to start doing is designing for the extremes. The middle will take care of itself. So remember when I talked about that bell curve and everybody being kind of like your target audience being in the middle and then everybody else being on the sides a little more? That's basically what it comes down to. So if you design all that stuff for people with disabilities, people that are older, or people that use mobile devices, chances are that anything in between or everything in between will benefit from it as well. Design that is accessible is easier to use. It's more intuitive. It's not simpler because it's dumbed down. It's simpler because things have been thought about and the way that they're presented makes more sense. It focuses on things much more precisely, so you don't have to understand 5 things at once in order to be able to grab that content. It's organized in ways that make it easier for you to figure it out. So if you design for these extremes, you get everything in between by doing that. So you don't need to create something for people with disabilities and then something for the rest of the people. You just create something that has a strong foundation to begin with, and then everybody benefits from it. So benefits all of us, whether it's disabilities, aging, or other devices, or anything that comes next, basically is what this is about. And then when it comes to students specifically, so here at McGill, basically 39,000 students, about 1,600 of them, or 4%, are registered with OSD. The discussion that we had earlier, what I was told was basically that 1 out of 5 people who would actually qualify for services are asking for them. So that means basically that about 8,000 people at McGill would qualify, therefore have some sort of a disability or some sort of an issue that they would need support with in order to be as successful as they could be. And that adds up to 20.5% of the people. So I was talking about 14 plus 13 something at one point. We're 20.5 here. And we're talking about, in general, a younger population. So we're not really taking aging into consideration that much, but I'm assuming that you've seen an increase in the number of people that are older that are coming back to school after they've retired and everything like that. So there's that too. But that's 1 out of 5, basically, that falls into that big category or big bucket of people who benefit from accessibility. Yeah, so that's what I meant to do when I did this before. So basically, it's on par with the rest of the population. That's the message here. And mobile devices are becoming the cheapest way to get online. So if you're a student and you can't really afford to get all these things, because you just moved out of your parents' house and you need to buy the computer and you need to buy this and that and that and that, maybe you just buy a really good cell phone and you use that for everything that's online. You have your data plan, that's all you need really. So there's Wi-Fi everywhere, so you're pretty good with this. So the cheapest way to get online, and for a lot of people who actually need assistive technology, they're finding that it's much cheaper to buy an iPhone or Android device than actually buy the latest version of JAWS, which costs over $1,000. So it's much cheaper to get a phone. As a bonus, you get a phone and everything that comes with it. So why just buy JAWS as a technology? And so the number of students that are relying on mobile devices as their main access point to the internet increases and increases and increases. And I haven't been in a classroom for like 20 years, but I'm assuming that people aren't taking notes on paper that much anymore. Not as much as we were 20 years ago. When I was at UCAM, when we had 1 or 2 people that had a laptop, they were the weird ones. Now people are taking notes on their cell phone in Evernote and then syncing that to other devices through iCloud and everything like that. So it's way different now, and it's not going to change. That's the idea here. So what does that mean for some of that content? So inaccessible content is one thing, but PDF documents on mobile devices can be pretty difficult. If you need accessibility support and you're using an iOS device, you don't get any support for PDF documents. It only works if you're using Windows-based devices. So you don't get that benefit if you need that. Flash-based videos or applications are simply not supported on iOS. So again, if you're providing content in video in Flash, unless you have a fallback in HTML5, you're not going to get anything at all either. Users bandwidth, same thing. So if you're asking me to download all these PDFs and all that documentation in order to be able to follow your course, and each document has been created and has not been optimized that much, and you're asking me to download hundreds of megabytes of information, I'm paying that out of my own pocket at the end of the month to TELUS or Rogers or somebody else. So all these things matter. It's a different paradigm. Speaking of which, what I'm saying is that mobile is killing the last teaching paradigms of the 20th century. So whether it's using that laptop, which is already old news, a tablet, or a phone, basically things have changed and will keep on changing a lot. And then there's this, wearable technology, Internet of Things. What does that change, really? When your watch is a phone, when you're using glasses where you can record stuff. So all these things are pretty much changing the interaction that you have with the students, or the teacher has with the students. And then who knows where it's going to go afterwards. And the idea is that when you're creating content that is not meant to be accessible, you're focusing on the specific user groups, and what that means basically is that you're creating prejudice for the other ones. And that's where I could have gone into that whole discussion about litigation, which I'm not going to do. But it's been known to happen, not in Canada, but a lot of universities in the United States have been sued over things like that. And more others will be sued as well in the next few years. I wouldn't know, they're my clients. That's the people I work for. And where does it stop? I mean, that would be cool, right? So you just plug into something, and then you get all that information. It's downloaded in 2 seconds, or better than that, you just go into Matrix, and then you jack in, and you know Kung Fu after 2 seconds. That's pretty cool. And it shouldn't stop, really. I mean, this is where we're going. And the more we do these things, the more we will take it for granted. The more we take it for granted, the more difficult it will be for people that are not included in these things. And then the more difficult for them it becomes to actually revendicate some support or some empowerment in this. And I know I'm out of time, and we're almost done. So I found this quote from Duncan Wilson, who works for Intel, which is pretty interesting. It says, the Internet of Things is the next big wave of computing. It will touch more aspects of our lives and have more profound effect than we can begin to imagine. So if we can think about something like this, because we can think about that, what are the other things that are coming up or that may already be existing that we don't know about? That would radically change the way that we interact with the web, with technology and everything. So we need to be open to these things, and the only way to do that really is to build content that is accessible, that meets those open standards, that is built in a way that is inclusive. If we do that, we're just broadening our chances to grab as many people as we can, instead of focusing on what we think are the target audiences. And then this empowers students to have a real shot at getting a diploma. The dedication that we put into this helps breaking the cycle of precarity and isolation that these people live. So again, if you look at it from a strictly financial perspective, and I wish I had kept that statistic when I found it, but basically there was a statistic saying that for every person that is unemployed for whatever reason, it costs that much to the society, and for every person that is employed, it brings that much, and the numbers were staggering. The contribution that it brings is so much bigger than what it actually costs. I mean, and it starts here. It starts in institutions like this one, making sure that we don't shut the door for a lot of people makes it so that we have more people that are contributing ultimately, and better lives for all of these people as well, and all the people that they live with. So being inclusive is a shared responsibility to which we should all be held accountable. We all have a role to play in this, and we're obviously as strong as our weakest link is. So if that weakest link is a flash file or a PDF, that's where it begins. It could be as simple as that. And because ultimately content and user interfaces are like jokes, if users don't understand them, it's because they're not that good. That was it. So thank you very much. So if you're not willing to do it for others, then at least consider doing it for your future selves, because we're all headed in that direction anyway. So a few books if you want to read on that subject or that topic that I would recommend. They're really interesting. This one is about building accessible content, or building content with progressive enhancement in mind. So thinking about these things to begin with. This is about building for mobile first, and then increasing that to working with desktop devices, desktop or laptops, I mean. So again, thinking about a different paradigm for building content. Well, they're pretty much all about that. They're all really good. Read them all while walking, I have to say. And it's great. They're really good content. So that's it. So that was me. So if you want to reach me again, this is the easiest way to do it. Happy to leave you a card otherwise if you want another like old way to do stuff. And those are all the images that I took. Because obviously I didn't take all those shots myself. So yeah, that's it. So thank you very much.